You conducted the investigation. Who was responsible?
I don't have that name, sir. I don't remember, to be honest with you.
You don't remember again?
I don't recall. I don't recall. I never said I didn't do anything wrong.
I have not violated any IRS rules or regulations.
I'm not personally responsible.
I will not answer any questions or testify today.
My question isn't about who's going to resign. My question is, who's going to jail over this scandal?
Welcome to the broadcast, everyone. And about 18 months ago, we were contacted by one conservative organization that was being hassled by the Internal Revenue Service. Their application had been pending at that point for almost 2 years without any response on their tax-exempt status. They were clearly qualified for tax exemption, but the IRS was just not responding. That one case blossomed into 27 cases in a very short order, about 6 weeks. We were contacted by numerous groups with the same problem. The IRS asked a series of very intrusive questions, including names of members, information about political positions, information about what side of a particular issue the organization found themselves on. It went even further than that. In one of our cases, the individual organization, which was a mentoring organization for high school students, was asked what curriculum they had used, who they were mentoring, and they wanted the names and addresses of the minors. These were teenagers. So the IRS could contact them. Obviously, this was intrusive. It violated not only statutory law, but constitutional law. And I know something about the IRS's procedures because I was an IRS attorney when I first came out of law school. I actually worked in the Office of Chief Counsel for the Internal Revenue Service as a trial lawyer, and the tax-exempt group, or tax-exempt division, was one of our clients. It was outrageous, so the ACLJ took some direct action. I assembled a team of lawyers to work on these cases, to demand that first the IRS retract the questions that they had asked that were so intrusive, including the membership data, that they only focus on the legitimate exempt questions. And to be quite frank, for about 6 months, we heard nothing from the Internal Revenue Service. We now know exactly what was going on. The IRS had targeted conservative organizations. They had done this at the top of the IRS level. The targeting was discussed even with the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury. The head of the tax-exempt division actually was not only aware of the program, but changed the criteria for selection, which actually made the issue even worse. In fact, Lois Lerner, who took the Fifth Amendment when she was called before Congress to testify, actually signed letters that we received at the ACLJ.
Several committees in Congress have already said they plan to hold extensive hearings into this particular case and the broader issue of IRS mismanagement.
All kinds of Treasury rules of conduct that were no doubt violated, not to mention just the trust of the American people.
There's numerous violations both of the Internal Revenue Manual, of existing federal law, potentially criminal law, including conspiracy to deprive individuals of their civil rights. And the fact of the matter is, I don't think this is going to get better. This is not like a fine wine that's going to age well. This is going to get worse as more information is out there.
It's an enormous scope. 471 groups apparently were targeted. I mean, that takes a lot of effort, a lot of manpower. Did somebody dream this up on his own, or did somebody on high say it'd be a good idea to stick it to the Tea Party?
As the IG stated, that a number of the questions that were asked were not only burdensome, but also in violation of existing law, membership list, donor data. This was far more intrusive than what happened in Watergate. And you've got the additional factor here that you have Supreme Court precedent since the 1950s that said that information is simply not to be given to the IRS. You don't give membership lists of organizations. Someone said it smacks of McCarthyism. I said it's worse than McCarthyism. This is, who did you know? Who did you talk to? Are you a member, or have you ever been a member of a conservative organization? Yeah. And if you are, you're going to be denied exempt status or put through the ringer.
Can you give us assurances that the IRS is not targeting particular groups based on political leanings?
Yes, I can give you assurances. As you know, we pride ourselves on being a non-political, nonpartisan organization. There's absolutely no targeting. This is the kind of back and forth that happens when people apply for 501c4 status.
You didn't mention targeting based on ideology. You didn't mention targeting based on buzzwords like Tea Party or Patriots or 9/12. You knew that, but you didn't mention this to the committee. Do you not think that that's a very incomplete answer?
I answered the question truthfully.
They've just been caught. This is not an apology. This is they've been caught. Somebody has to be held accountable here, Sean. Well, this is outrageous.
Send us your Facebook pages, your Twitter pages. And I said, does that include personal pages? And they said everything. They wanted to know your personal relationships with politicians and political parties.
We had to, again, tell the IRS why these questions were unconstitutional, illegal, and inappropriate to be asking.
I don't care if you're a conservative, a liberal, a Democrat, or a Republican. This should send a chill up your spine.
There's clearly an organized effort within the IRS to target political opponents of the president. That's undeniable. How does such a culture come about? How vast was it? Who was involved? This really does call for a special counsel.
We are looking at right now filing in federal court, and it'll probably be multi-district litigation against the Internal Revenue Service for violating fundamental constitutional rights, freedom of speech, freedom of association, viewpoint discrimination because of the targeting of these groups.
Here's what we'd like you to do. We've got a petition that's now over 100,000 signatures to stop the abuse of the IRS, to hold the IRS responsible, and frankly, to hold the Obama administration responsible for what they've done. You could join with us at aclj.org or call us at 1-877-989-2255. That's aclj.org or 1-877-989-2255.
The scandal inside the Internal Revenue Service gets worse every day. New revelations show a growing scandal involving the IRS intentionally targeting conservative groups since at least 2011. Groups with the words Tea Party or even Patriot in their names were singled out and faced intrusive and intimidating questions that violated their First Amendment rights. What's worse, that abuse is still ongoing. It's time for those inside the Obama administration to be held accountable. Even President Obama has refused to answer specific questions about what he knew and when. The ACLJ has gone to federal court and filed a lawsuit against the IRS on behalf of a number of conservative organizations. Those responsible need to be held accountable. Stand with the ACLJ now. Sign on to our petition to end IRS abuse. Call now, 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255 or online, aclj.org.
Welcome back to the broadcast, everyone. We've got a very special broadcast this week as we're focusing in on the IRS case that is now in federal court. The government has been sued. We've sued the government for violating the rights of our clients, including their constitutional rights. The IRS acknowledged its wrongdoing, but took no corrective action. We're going to require they do that by getting justice in federal court. Well, the administrative process has gone on for too long, so we filed a federal lawsuit. We represent over 25 organizations. We've sued the IRS for discrimination based on viewpoint, for violation of free speech and freedom of association. We've also filed in the same lawsuit allegations that the IRS violated their own procedures and own internal guidelines. Of course, this comes on the heels of the IRS offering an apology. Now, could you imagine if you filed a return with the IRS that had incorrect information or data? You wouldn't get to just apologize. You would face an audit and maybe even criminal sanctions. Well, the IRS apologized, but quite frankly, the apology is not accepted. The IRS is right now institutionally incapable of doing what is necessary for justice. So now we've gone to the federal courts to not only obtain justice, but to demand it.
Breaking news out of Washington, a bombshell admission by the IRS. The tax agency is officially apologizing for subjecting conservative groups to additional scrutiny during the 2012 election.
Fox News alert on a bombshell admission by the Internal Revenue Service. The tax agency is apologizing today for unfairly targeting conservative political groups for additional reviews during the 2012 election. They admit they did it.
This is a letter from the Internal Revenue Service, Megan. This letter is from the Washington, D.C. office of the Internal Revenue Service. It's involving one of our clients in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It is signed by not just an agent, but a tax law specialist who is a lawyer with the Internal Revenue Service. So this whole notion that this is some limited, low-level staff, that is over with. This is out of Washington, D.C. This is not over. We're sending out a letter to the Internal Revenue Service and to the Chief Counsel on Monday demanding that the remainder of our clients that are affiliated with either Tea Party groups or conservative organizations be granted their exemption immediately. And let me tell you something else. We're looking at a cause of action against the Treasury for what they've done here. They don't get away with this. They should not be allowed to get away with it. So this is far from over. Apology not accepted.
We're going to sue the IRS, Tom's group, some groups that were approved, but approved after well over the normal period, the reasonable time period. And we still have 10 clients who are yet to be approved, some who filed in the end of 2009 that are still waiting.
There's a lot of lying going on here. We need to call it what it is, and it's lying, and it's lying under oath, I think, in some of these cases. And take it a step further, the president needs to really answer the question he was asked. Did anybody in the White House know what was going on here?
Key. What makes matters worse in this case is that Lois Lerner, the then head of Tax Exempt, actually had a question planted in an ABA speech that she gave. The question was done in order to get ahead of an Inspector General's report that was coming out critical of her and her office. The Inspector General rightly and correctly noted that the IRS had engaged in inappropriate and unlawful conduct. But she set this planted question in order to try to get around the Inspector General's report, or at least get ahead of it. She later took the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution as a basis to not incriminate herself, so she refused to testify before the United States Congress.
I have not done anything wrong. I have not broken any laws. I have not violated any IRS rules or regulations, and I have not provided false information to this or any other congressional committee. After very careful consideration, I've decided to follow my counsel's advice and not testify or answer any of the questions today.
I mean, this is one of the key links. And Lois Lerner, people need to understand this. Lois Lerner today is in charge of tax exempt for the IRS. They are institutionally incapable right now of doing anything with this kind of leadership in place. And top of that, the FBI investigating the IRS and these agents involved. So this is an unbelievable mess. It's gotten more complicated. Of course, the White House story changing day to day.
Newly surfaced letters suggest that higher-ups in Washington, D.C. at the IRS had also requested additional information, including the now suspended Lois Lerner, who pled the Fifth before Congress last week.
Well, we let out yesterday, and over the last several days, actually, a series of letters that shows signatures from Lois Lerner herself as the head of tax exempt to our clients, including those intrusive questions. And those letters, Shannon, were issued 9 months after Lois Lerner said the program had been shut down with the intrusive questions. They were issued in March and April of 2012. And remember, she said it was in 2011 that she put an end to those intrusive questions. Well, that's just not factually correct. Not only were the questions not ended, but she herself was the one signing the letters.
The misconduct had stopped in May of 2012. So despite all the media interest in our April 2013 awareness, it's important to remember that the misconduct, of course, had stopped almost a year earlier.
Well, he may say that's important to remember, but look at the date on this letter. It shows that one group was still being targeted, and some might say harassed, with a lot of questions about their status after they were left really hanging for a long time. This letter goes up to May 6th. This is just weeks ago. The White House also claims that this was just low-level officials, as we have said, but these documents show that it did go higher up. Dozens of letters, including this one. Look at the signature on that. Lois G. Lerner, Director of Exempt Organizations. That was sent to a conservative group in Virginia.
She also said that the practice of the intrusive letters stopped in 2011, and these letters with her name on it, which included the intrusive questionnaires, are from March and April of 2012. The fact of the matter is, her name is not on one letter, Martha. It's not on 2 letters. We have 15 with Lois Lerner's signature on it. A compliance letter for a 501c4 tax-exempt organization that has been recognized. They are a conservative group. They got randomly, last week, a compliance audit to go online and fill out an 8-page questionnaire with unbelievably intrusive questions. In the middle of all of this, the IRS is now doing compliance checks. This is harassment. It's absurd, and that's why we're in federal court.
But all this took place when Lois Lerner and the White House, Jay Carney, the spokesperson, said that all of these activities stopped in March of 2012. We've got 2 responses to that. Number one, the letters did not stop in March of 2012. We received a letter on March 6th of this year, 2013, requesting intrusive information from one of our clients. Number 2, Lois Lerner herself signed 15 letters that our clients received with the intrusive questions in them. And then they made the argument that it was just a few rogue agents in the office in Cincinnati. Well, folks, that's not true either, because I'm holding in my hand right here a letter from the Department of the Treasury, Washington, D.C., from a lawyer with the IRS. So the whole narrative that the government has been articulating, including Lois Lerner and Jay Carney, that this was a few rogue agents in Cincinnati is not true.
This was not one rogue agent. First of all, these are tax-exempt specialists. They're not general revenue agents. They're specialist trained. No one agent or two agents or a half dozen agents could decide to consolidate a group of audits like this, nor could they have drafted those form letters that were called form letters, the ones that had the 19 subparts, 19 or 20 questions with 8 subparts. Those were reviewed by group managers at a minimum, probably higher than that.
When they first talked about this, they said this was all localized in the Cincinnati office. Well, we knew immediately that wasn't true because we had received correspondence from 2 offices in California, from the Cincinnati office that they were blaming for the whole problem, and also from Washington, D.C., where Treasury Maine is. So this is something we knew had been going on from coast to coast, communicating with IRS offices from coast to coast, and the apology was something that was merely a partial confirmation of what we already knew, and we knew it was going to get worse rather than get better. We put out a letter, a demand letter today, giving the IRS until this Friday to recognize the 10 remaining groups that we represent that they have not granted exemption status for. So the clock is ticking for the IRS.
It's not a few rogue agents in Cincinnati. It's a lawyer in Washington, D.C. It's tax-exempt specialists in California. It's letters we received just a week ago asking for more intrusive information. And it's 15 letters signed by Lois Lerner herself. So this idea that they didn't know or they are not aware of who did this and it was only Cincinnati is incorrect as a matter of fact and inaccurate as a matter of law. Here's what we'd like you to do. We've got a petition that's now over 100,000 signatures to stop the abuse of the IRS, to hold the IRS responsible, and frankly to hold the Obama administration responsible for what they've done. You could join with us at aclj.org or call us at 1-877-989-2255. That's aclj.org or 1-877-989-2255.
The scandal inside the Internal Revenue Service gets worse every day. New revelations show a growing scandal involving the IRS intentionally targeting conservative groups since at least 2011. Groups with the words Tea Party or even Patriot in their names were singled out and faced intrusive and intimidating questions that violated their First Amendment rights. What's worse, that abuse is still ongoing. It's time for those inside the Obama administration to be held accountable. Even President Obama has refused to answer specific questions about what he knew and when. The ACLJ has gone to federal court and filed a lawsuit against the IRS on behalf of a number of conservative organizations. Those responsible need to be held accountable. Stand with the ACLJ now. Sign on to our petition to end IRS abuse. Call now, 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255 or online, aclj.org.
Welcome back to the broadcast, everyone. This is a very special broadcast this week. We're dealing with our lawsuit against the IRS, originating out of an attempt by the IRS to target conservative and Christian organizations. You know, in one case, they actually wanted to know the contents of the pro-life group's prayers. That's what they asked. In fact, that came up at a congressional hearing. Take a listen.
I got to tell you, I was shocked on Friday. I was really rocked when the Illinois congressman, brought out the letter to the IRS to the Coalition for Life in Iowa and said the IRS asked them in writing to tell us what your members pray for. That takes it to a different level for me.
We try to resolve this matter administratively. When news first broke that the IRS offered its apology, I sent a letter to the Chief Counsel of the IRS, to the Secretary of the Treasury, to Lois Lerner, to all of the agents involved in the cases that we represented, the 27 clients we had, and the 10 outstanding applications. And I asked for something very simple. I said, for the 10 outstanding cases that we have, simply grant their status. The IRS admitted they engaged in unlawful targeting. The response I got from the IRS? Well, it was actually no response. The IRS did not respond at all. That left us with no choice but to file an action in federal court. As I'm coming to you today, I filed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia this federal lawsuit against the IRS. It's about an inch thick. It names a lot of individuals that were responsible for this, and some individuals we've named as unknown because we don't know exactly who else was involved in this. We're going to get to the bottom of this, but it's taking federal court action to do it. This has been an intense effort. As I mentioned earlier, I was actually with the Office of Chief Counsel for the IRS, the group we're suing now, when I first started my legal career. I'm heading up a legal team of 5 lawyers that are experts in federal litigation. This is going to be a massive undertaking. In fact, it already has been. We have one lawyer that's strictly dealing with the agents. We have another lawyer that's strictly dealing with putting the complaints together. Actually, that's a team of 2 lawyers. Then my team is actually heading up the litigation, which will include the discovery, the depositions, the interrogatories, the ongoing motions that will be argued in federal court, and then ultimately, of course, the trial. We've committed thousands of hours to this endeavor already, and frankly, we have not even begun in this fight for justice. The White House spokesperson, Jay Carney, has changed his storyline at least 3 times. He's changed the dates in which information was known. He first said that no one inside the White House was aware of it until the Inspector General's report came out. That was incorrect. In fact, that was a lie.
If it is true that there was a knowing effort to target specific organizations, as reported conservative organizations, that would be outrageous in the president's view, and there should be.
I've got letters signed by Lois Lerner to our client. In fact, 15 letters from Lois Lerner. Jay Carney keeps saying this, and you almost feel horrible for him because I'm sure he's getting his information for somebody. But saying that the letters stopped and the approach stopped in May of last year. We received a letter just May 6th of this year with more intrusive questions from one of our clients. That is not a Tea Party group, but they've been caught up in this net of conservative organizations, and they were asking them for the copies of the curriculums they utilized and the students that they met with. This is a deep problem, a serious problem. The apology was a planted question, and I think it's just gotten from bad to worse.
The Chief Counsel, the White House Counsel, the Office of Chief Counsel of the Internal Revenue Service, the Deputy White House Counsel, the Deputy Chief of Staff, and the Chief of Staff were all aware of the impending Inspector General's report. But I think what was most troubling was when the President of the United States was asked the question, Mr. President, can you assure us that no one inside the White House knew about what was going on at the IRS until the April 22nd disclosure? He said, well, I'll answer that question. No one was aware of the Inspector General's report. But you'll see, that was not the question the President was asked. And he could not answer that no one was aware inside the White House of what was going on, because the fact of the matter was, individuals, including his Chief of Staff, knew exactly what was at stake and exactly what the IRS was doing.
Mr. President, I want to ask you about the IRS. Can you assure the American people that nobody in the White House knew about the agency's actions before your counsel's office found out on April 22nd? And when they did find out, do you think that you should have learned about it before you learned about it from news reports, as you said last Friday? And also, are you opposed to there being a special counsel appointed to lead the Justice Department investigation?
Well, with respect to the IRS, I spoke to this yesterday. My main concern is fixing a problem. And we began that process yesterday by asking and accepting the resignation of the acting director there. We will be putting in new leadership that will be able to make sure that following up on the IG audit, that we gather up all the facts, that we hold accountable those who have taken these outrageous actions. As I said last night, it is just simply unacceptable for there to even be a hint of partisanship or ideology when it comes to the application of our tax laws. Let me make sure that I answer a specific question. I can assure you that I certainly did not know anything about the IG report before the IG report had been leaked through press, through the press.
Here's the really scary part of all this. It's the IRS and 15,000 new Internal Revenue Service agents that are charged with enforcing Obamacare. After this disaster for the IRS, and frankly disaster for the American people, with targeting by the IRS of conservative groups, with the FBI investigating the IRS, with the IRS head of tax exempt taking the Fifth Amendment. And now we're going to entrust the IRS to enforce Obamacare. That in and of itself is enough to cause us to continue this effort to stop the abuse at the IRS, targeted at the American people. The IRS acknowledged through Lois Lerner in the planted question, the fake question, it wasn't a real question, they did this to get ahead of this report. The IRS acknowledged that they engaged in unlawful activity, that they targeted conservative groups based on their names and what they were saying. That's called viewpoint discrimination. I've argued 2 cases at the Supreme Court of the United States involving viewpoint discrimination. We won them both. One of them 8-1, the other one unanimous. The court is not going to allow a government agency to engage in viewpoint discrimination against American citizens, but it's going to take court action to get the just result. 2 things need to happen. Number 1, the IRS needs to grant the tax exemption for the 10 clients that are now pending, and probably a dozen more that we don't even know about. Number 2, our clients have suffered real harm. Many of them lost grants that they were entitled to if they obtained their C4 status, their tax exempt status. Because the IRS refused to act, they lost grants. Some have incurred accounting fees when they first processed the application. Now, at the ACLJ, we don't charge for legal services, but these clients incurred expenses before we got involved. And number 3, really what needs to happen is the IRS also needs to change its policies. A court needs to issue an injunction telling the IRS not only did they do wrong by the American people, but they violated the law, and they will never be able to do that again. And it's going to take a declaratory judgment and an injunction to ensure that the IRS is ultimately held accountable. I want to encourage you as we close this broadcast out to take direct action. Support our work at the ACLJ. Help us maintain the vigilance needed in the courtroom. Your tax-deductible support for the ACLJ will go a long way in helping us fight for freedom here. I also want you to join over 100,000 other Americans that have signed a petition to stop the IRS abuse that's taking place right now. You know, it really doesn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat or Independent. No one in America should be targeted because of their views. You can do so by going to aclj.org or simply calling us at 1-877-989-2255. It's aclj.org or 1-877-989-2255. We'll talk to you next week.
The scandal inside the Internal Revenue Service gets worse every day. New revelations show a growing scandal involving the IRS intentionally targeting conservative groups since at least 2011. Groups with the words Tea Party or even Patriot in their names were singled out and faced intrusive and intimidating questions that violated their First Amendment rights. What's worse, that abuse is still ongoing. It's time for those inside the Obama administration to be held accountable. Even President Obama has refused to answer specific questions about what he knew and when. The ACLJ has gone to federal court and filed a lawsuit against the IRS on behalf of a number of conservative organizations. Those responsible need to be held accountable. Stand with the ACLJ now. Sign on to our petition to end IRS abuse. Call now, 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255 or online, aclj.org.